everyone. Happy almost Thanksgiving. Welcome to Lunch Hour Lessons with Allison. I'm Allison Mädl, and today's November 21st, 2018. And every Wednesday at 12:30, I come to you live to introduce a topic that I think is interesting and give you a lesson to take with you into your daily life. If you have questions or like what you hear, feel free to be sure to comment or like this video. And right after the broadcast, I'll be posting a transcript of this week's lesson on my blog at AllisonMädl.com. So this week's topic is respect the enzyme. Today's topic is a little more nutrition, science, technical oriented, but I really encourage you to stick with me and you'll learn some practical information, and I'll try to keep it brief. So last week we talked about how words that end in ose are usually sugars. And this week we're going to talk about how words that end in ase, A-S-E, are enzymes. And I'll give you some examples. So enzymes would be something like lactase, which breaks down the milk sugar lactose. Or amylase, which breaks down the starch amylose. Or something like lipase, which breaks down fats or lipids. And finally, an example would be protease, which breaks down proteins. So you can think of digestive enzymes as specialized keys that unlock the bonds between food molecules and break them down into their smallest building blocks. And that process of breaking down foods into their smallest building blocks is digestion. That's the basic process of digestion. Then those building blocks can go through our small intestine and out into our bloodstream to be absorbed and used for growth, biochemical processes, and energy. So there's three types of what we call macronutrients of the foods we eat. And they're fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So when we eat, for example, something like fats, when those fats go into our body, we need the key, the enzyme, to break apart the bonds of those fats into what are called fatty acids. Fatty acids are the smallest building blocks of fats. The next one would be proteins. So when we eat proteins, the enzyme key goes in and breaks apart the proteins into the smallest building blocks of proteins, which are amino acids. And then carbohydrates, we can eat anything carbohydrate rich, and the enzyme goes ahead and breaks apart that bond of the carbohydrate down into simple sugars. So we end up with fatty acids, amino acids, and simple sugars as all being the smallest building blocks of those three macronutrients. And those are absorbed rapidly into our small intestine and then through the bloodstream, and that can nourish our bodies. So for example, something you might see in the stores is that certain brands of milk label themselves lactose-free. And what the manufacturer has done is they've put in an enzyme called lactase that breaks apart the bonds between the molecules and allows the people who don't produce lactase on their own to be able to digest that milk. Most people do produce lactase on their own, so they don't need a special kind of milk to be able to digest it. But unfortunately, and kind of as a side note, this lactose-free milk that has that lactase enzyme added to it is often ultra-pasteurized, which is really a subject for another lesson, but ultra-pasteurization destroys the protein breakdown enzymes in the milk. So even though you can have better help with the sugar digestion of the lactose, when the protein digestion enzymes are destroyed in the ultra-pasteurization, then you end up with problems with the protein digestion of the milk. So it's really not a healthful food, unfortunately. So at a very young age for children, when we think about enzymes, it's important to set infants up for long-term digestive health by feeding them foods that their enzymes are ready for. So when babies are born, their bodies only make enzymes to help them digest the proteins, fats, and carbohydrates inherently present in mother's milk. And as they grow, their bodies eventually develop enzymes to break down proteins and fats in the new solid foods that they're going to be eating. But not until they're about 3 years old do babies possess a full range of carbohydrate digesting enzymes. So if we think about it and we think about what are the most appropriate foods for babies after when they're growing, we can understand how those enzymes work. And now that we know that the carbohydrate digesting enzymes come later, we can see that feeding things like rice, oats, wheat, and other grains to children is really an inadvisable practice if they're younger than 3 years old. And it can actually set them up for food intolerances later on. So, because we really want to make sure that their bodies can break down into those smallest building blocks before they're absorbed. Any foods that kind of stick around, that don't get broken down into the smallest building blocks, when they try to get passed through the small intestine, they irritate the gut lining and can make it kind of difficult for babies and children to digest their food. So along with the enzymes that we ourselves have in our own bodies, foods themselves can contain enzymes. And we can drastically increase the enzyme content of the foods that we eat by undergoing a process called lactofermentation. And that's going to be the subject of next week's lesson when we talk about homemade yogurt. So that's all the time we have for today. And be sure to tell your friend this week's lunch hour lesson, which is enzymes make it possible for us to use the foods that we eat. Enzymes make it possible for us to use the foods that we eat. Like my page to get the weekend tip that comes out every Saturday that goes with this lesson, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.